Hey everyone, and welcome to Sasquatch Theory. In this video, I will be talking about my Bigfoot, cryptid, and paranormal encounters that took place in central Missouri, close to the Mark Twain National Forest. I'm glad to finally get these encounters off of my chest and share them with people who might understand, and hopefully it helps someone in the future to not feel the way I did. When you see a creature like this, it will blow your mind forever, but you will also feel isolated and a little disturbed just because there are never any solid answers. I hope these encounters might help any paranormal or cryptid researchers, and my goal is to encourage others to stand up and share their encounters with people so we can finally figure out what is really going on. I've thought about my encounters over and over, and hopefully sharing them with you guys will help me better understand what happened. Before I begin this story, I want to mention that I've had a lot of paranormal experiences that I won't talk about today, but briefly cover on, and in no way am I saying the paranormal and Bigfoot is connected, but I feel it's important to share my paranormal experiences, just in case there is a connection. Alright, I'm kind of taking a leap of faith here, so let's dive straight into my personal Bigfoot, cryptid, and paranormal encounters that took place in central Missouri. Hey everyone, and welcome to Sasquatch Theory. In today's video, I want to talk about my Bigfoot, cryptid, and paranormal encounters that took place here in central Missouri. And I think you guys are going to find these stories to be rather interesting, and I'm shaking just talking about it, so let's dive right into it, guys. This experience took place whenever I was around 12 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom, and it was summertime around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. And I had the window cracked. I was on my computer and I was watching TV. I was sitting there having a good time, and all of a sudden I heard this vocalization that sounded like a werewolf, just deep and guttural. And I'll try to recreate it the best that I can. It was like, but you could feel the bass, and the sound of this vocalization reverberated through my body, and it was extremely loud, and it carried off for about 5 to 7 seconds. As soon as this vocalization tapered off, something else screamed at whatever was howling, and it just sounded like a metal screamer, like but that terrified me so bad that I got up, went to the window, slammed it shut, ran over to my bed, and got underneath the covers and waited until the morning time, because whatever that was, I know it wasn't human, and it sounded like a monster. Honestly, I thought somebody set up a PA system out in the woods and they were trying to scare me. But that was the only explanation that I had at the time, and for many years I wondered, what did I experience? What was that? And I could never really figure it out until I got a lot older. All right, this next encounter took place around 2008 whenever I was in high school. Me and my buddy Bruce decided to go on a road trip and drive down to the Merrimack River. We took a state highway to get there, and it was around 9 or 10 o'clock at nighttime. We were driving down the highway, and down at the bottom of the hill, we spotted a possum, and all of a sudden my buddy Bruce decided to step on the gas. And I looked over at him like, you know, what are you doing? And as we got closer to the possum, you can see it lit up in the headlights. All of a sudden, this canine creature dives out of the woods onto the highway, snatches up the possum, throws it up in its mouth, and then shakes it like a rag doll and tears off back into the woods. And right as that happened, we passed by and fly past the spot where the creature came out at. And we were both shocked. The first thing my buddy Bruce said was, "Whoa, did you see that?" And I looked over at him and I said, "Yeah, what was that?" He said, "I don't know." We couldn't figure it out. We thought it was some type of wild dog, maybe somebody's dog was living out in the woods. So the best way I can describe how this creature looked is if you mixed a blue pit bull with a lion, and this canine creature had a really big chest, and its back legs kind of tapered off and were a lot smaller. But it had a really long snout. It was pretty wide, similar to a hyena, and it had pointy ears. Its eyes glue yellow because the headlights were hitting it. But like I said, it had short hair like a blue pit bull. And what I found interesting was around its neck, it had this mange like a lion, and it was like a darker gray color. But I could never figure out what it was. And for many years, I wondered about that werewolf call that I heard outside my window and this canine creature that I seen back in high school. It really terrified me, and I just wondered over the years what that could have been. And I could never find a place for that in my mind, and I just kept wondering about it for many years. All right, so this next experience takes place whenever I was around 25, 26 years old. My ex-girlfriend, her kid, and I had decided to go to the Merrimack River and go camping. It was during the summertime, and there was a lot of floaters out during the day. And we were just enjoying our time on the river. We had set up a tent on the bank, and we were cooking hot dogs, burgers, and just watching the floaters as they go by. I remember us talking about the show Finding Bigfoot, and we were discussing the possibilities of the existence of Sasquatch in Missouri. And I decided to go to my vehicle, pull out a baseball bat that I had in there, one that I used to use in high school. I did a few wood knocks on a tree, and they were pretty loud, and they echoed all across the river valley. And I did a few whoops that I heard off of the show Finding Bigfoot. We were kind of joking and laughing, but all of a sudden, across the river, a large tree crashed down, and it was a very large tree. It was very similar to whenever somebody cuts down a tree and you can hear every limb snapping and popping, and whenever the large tree hits the ground, it kind of shakes a little bit and you can feel the boom. We didn't think too much of it, and we went back to enjoying the river. And it wasn't until it got dark, after all the floaters have cleared off, my ex-girlfriend had put her son to bed in the tent, and we were sitting around the campfire, and we were talking about that tree that went down across the river. All of a sudden, something behind us screamed so loud, and it terrified us. The best way I can describe this vocalization is like a metal screamer. It sounded like, but it echoed across the entire valley, and it happened behind us because we were facing the river. Well, all of a sudden, my ex-girlfriend said, grab your gun, grab your gun. And sitting right next to me at that time, I had a Glock 19, chambered in 9, and I didn't grab the gun because I felt like if I would have grabbed it, this creature would have came into our camp and tore us apart. And that's the impression that I got. So I didn't touch it. And honestly, I had this little smirk on my face, like a little smile, because in that moment, I realized that Sasquatch are in Missouri. But I couldn't believe it, honestly. I didn't know what it was because it sounded so unusual. I never heard Sasquatch before, so I couldn't say, yeah, that was Bigfoot. But I was trying to find a reason in my mind as to what that was. And I was thinking to myself, maybe a mountain lion snuck up behind us, climbed up into the tree about 7 to 9 feet and screamed at us because it didn't want us in the area. And that's what I told myself. But I just thought about what it could have been. I couldn't figure it out. It really freaked me out. And I feel like whatever this was followed me home, which was probably about 5 minutes away from there. One day, I got home from work and I decided to take out the trash. I was going out back and I was standing on the deck and I was thinking about that scream that I heard on the Merrimack River. So I did a whoop, a loud whoop right before it got dark. And whenever I was walking back after I took out the trash, it sounded like something was tearing through the woods. You can hear limbs and trees snapping. It sounded like it was zigzagging through the woods coming my way. So I go inside the house and I get my ex-girlfriend. I'm like, hey, come here, something's outside. So she comes outside, she's standing on the deck with me, and we could hear this thing crashing through the woods coming right at us. So we walk down into the backyard and we're standing there, and whatever this is, it just stopped at the edge of the wood line, and it was just far enough in the woods to where you couldn't see whatever it was, and it was also getting dark at this time. but I couldn't figure out what that was either. I didn't know what would crash through the woods like that, because it sounded like somebody put an S10 pickup truck in neutral and just let it roll down through the woods. It sounded very similar to that. I would also hear these clicking sounds on my window, like something was tapping, but you could hear like nails clicking on the window, and that happened about 3 or 4 times. And one time I even ran out there as soon as it happened and ran circles around my house, and there was nothing there. Another time I was in the backyard and I was looking up at the stars. I saw this bright star, so I thought it was orange, and I was thinking, man, that's got to be Jupiter, Mars, Venus, something like that. Well, all of a sudden it starts getting closer, 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 and closer, and all of a sudden it's right above me, and it's about the size of a basketball, and it's radiating different colors, and it's very similar to like a disco ball, and it was radiating different colors like a strobe light. I go into the house, I go and get my ex, and she comes outside and into the yard, and we're both staring at this thing. And by this point, it starts moving from the west down to the south to the front of the house. And we're standing there watching it as it's changing colors, flickering, and all of a sudden this thing shoots up at a 90-degree angle, and it's gone. It looked like it got sucked up into space, but in that moment I knew that I seen a UFO, because there's no explanation to what I seen, and there's no craft that can move that fast that we have anyways. So at this point in my life, I'm really going through a hard time, and I'd lost a girlfriend, my house, my job, my friends had all moved away, and I found a job at a meat processing plant. One morning I was in there and I was talking to the boss, and we were talking about hunting whitetail deer because bow season was right around the corner. I asked him, do you know of any good public land areas that I can hunt at? I'm kind of new to public land, new to bow hunting, and I really want to get into it. He said, yeah, sure, there's this area off of the Merrimack River that's covered with deer. He said, I go there and I'll see about 20, 30 deer in one evening. And I was like, yeah, I totally want to go there. He wrote the directions to this area on a napkin, and as he was describing the area, he would say, do you know where this is? And I would just nod my head, because I really didn't know where it was at, but I knew the general location. So right after work, I go straight to this area, and to my amazement, I actually found the spot that he was talking about. And whenever I got to the dead end road in this conservation area, I had parked my car, got out, and walked over to the edge of the cliff, and I was looking off the cliff, and you can see the Merrimack River down below, a bunch of woods and some farmland. And I thought, man, this is gonna be awesome. And I was in there scouting the area because it was September 14th, 2018, the day before opening bow season. And whenever I turned back around and walked back over to my car, I saw this black creature in the woods right off of the parking lot, and it was on all fours, and I saw it move through the trees, and it was jet black, but it was really big. So I thought to myself, man, that's got to be a black bear or a hog. It could be a group of turkeys moving together through the woods. I'm not really sure. And whenever I finally get a good look at it, all I see is this big black shape slowly hide behind the tree. And then it was gone. I was kind of staring at that large oak tree, and it never revealed itself again. So I was kind of thinking to myself, man, if that was a black bear, that thing is super intelligent. The fact that it knew to hide behind the tree like that is amazing. And I just kind of got a bad feeling. I went home, got all my stuff ready for the hunt in the morning, and I drove out that next morning, got to that same spot, parked my car, turned it off, and I just sat there. And I just had a really spooky feeling, because in this area I would have to go down that cliff, cross the river, and on the other side I would set up my stand. But I just got a really bad feeling because of that creature that I seen, and I was thinking, man, if there are bear in this area, I don't want to run into it, because this is the exact spot where I'd seen them, so they have to be around somewhere. I ended up turning my car back on and driving back home that morning, and I never bow hunted that day. So at this point, it's 2019, and I had found myself in a really dark place in life. I was aiming down pretty hard. One day I just woke up with the pain in my back, and I didn't really think too much of it at first, and it ended up getting a lot worse. And it got to the point where I could barely walk, and what they told me was I had a few herniated discs in my back and it caused sciatica. So I had like this sharp pain from my lower back, my butt area, shooting down back to the back of my leg, down in my knee and down into my toes. So it was like really hard to like stretch out my leg, and the only relief I could find was either standing up or laying down in bed, and that started to get really old. So what I had done to relieve the pain was I began hiking around the property and just trying to stretch out my muscles and try to get my back feeling better. I drove into town one day to go to the grocery store, and whenever I was driving back, I was going down the forested driveway, and I decided I'm going to check my trail camera. So I immediately pulled over, parked at the top of the driveway, got out and checked the trail camera. Whenever I walked back to my vehicle, I was standing there on my phone, not really doing anything, and all of a sudden I heard this loud, distinct whistle to my left. And it sounded like really loud and distinct. So I looked over and I thought, man, someone's standing over there, like someone's coming my way. And I never saw anyone. And a few seconds after that whistle, right in front of me, I heard another loud whistle. This whistle was unusual because it was dual toned. It had that high pitch sound, but it also had this low whistle to it at the same time that sounded like. And a few seconds after that whistle, I hear another one to my right. So I thought, what the heck? Somebody's out there in the woods. Somebody's watching me. There's trespassers out there, or it's something paranormal. I kind of got the feeling that something wasn't right, and I couldn't figure it out. I got back home and I was down at the house for about an hour, and I couldn't stop thinking about those whistles. So I decided to walk back up the driveway. And whenever I got to the spot where I heard the whistles, it was almost dark time, and I could see these two orange lights floating in the woods about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And I didn't know what it was. I kind of thought it was somebody with flashlights walking through the woods or people with lanterns, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. You couldn't hear anybody talking. And I didn't approach the lights just because I got this feeling that if I follow the lights, something bad is going to happen. And that's just the impression that I had at the time, because the Native Americans say that if you follow these lights, they'll lead you to your demise. And I don't know, I guess people in the past have followed the orbs and they've like fallen off cliffs or gotten hurt. So yeah, I didn't, and it really freaked me out. So after I seen these orbs, I started walking back down to my house, and at this point it's pitch black outside. Whenever I got halfway down the driveway, to my left, I heard this loud thump, just one loud thump. And I thought to myself, man, that's unusual, because if that was a white-tailed deer, he would have took off running, not just one jump and stood there. And after I heard the thump, I heard 3 distinct whoops, like something was coming at me. And it sounded like it was on all fours, low to the ground, but I could hear it clear as day. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And then everything stopped. I got this strange feeling, and the hairs on the back of my neck started standing up, and I even said, this is a messed up feeling. So I started walking back to my house, and I couldn't figure out what the heck was in the woods, because like I said, if it was a deer that would have jumped off, you would have heard it crashing through the woods, and it never did that. It was just like somebody picked up a big log and just dropped it. After I heard the whistles and seen the orbs and experienced a strange activity, I began to find strange structures and small clues that there was something off in the area. I had found a passion for mushroom hunting, and walking around the woods seemed to relieve my symptoms, and it made my back feel better. One day I was out here in the woods searching for chanterelle mushrooms and chicken of the woods, and I was doing zigzags around the woods, picking up chanterelles and putting them in my backpack. And I was thinking to myself, man, if these chanterelles are growing all around the house, they have to be all over deep in the woods. So I looked deep in the woods all around this property, and I didn't find very many chanterelles. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go back around my house because that seemed to be where all the chanterelles were at. And I ended up picking as many chanterelles as I could. I filled up my backpack and I was walking down the driveway here. And whenever I got almost to the parking lot, like I could start seeing the parking lot, I could see my car sitting there and the color of the house. I thought I heard something in the woods, and honestly, it just sounded like a little squirrel or a bird wrestling in the leaves. And I looked over and I didn't see anything. I remember seeing this black stump, and I didn't really think much of it because a lot of these oak trees look black. And I continued walking. I took about 3 more steps, and whenever I looked back over to my left, I saw this creature that was crouched down stand up, and it just immediately walked off. And I knew instantly that what I was looking at was Bigfoot. This creature had a round head. He was probably about 6.5, maybe 7.5 feet tall. It was jet black. His face was dark, like coal black, and it had these almond-shaped eyes that were jet black as well. It had a big brow ridge, flat nose, and it almost seemed like its chin was connected to its chest. And I noticed that whenever it walked, you couldn't hear its footsteps. And out here, with all these oak leaves, it sounds like cornflakes whenever you're walking in the woods. What I noticed as this creature was walking away, it had these white gray stripes going down its back. Like it started at its shoulder blade and ended right above its butt. And honestly, it kind of had like the shape of like a lightning bolt, but it had it on one side and on the other side. And on the back of its calf, it had like these white grayish patches on it. So it was a jet black creature with a little bit of white in it. And I got the feeling that it reminded me of like a skunk or a lemur, honestly. Like those same types of colors. I got to see the creature for about 5 to 7 seconds. This creature looked over at me several times, about 2 or 3 times, I guess to see if I was gonna follow it. And it ended up disappearing into the oak trees, and it was gone. I snapped back into reality after that because whenever I was looking at the creature, I was so shocked that I couldn't be scared, excited, or anything. It was just empty emotions, and I was fixed on whatever I was looking at. So yeah, like I said, once it walked off, I had a hard time believing what I had seen. So immediately I took off running, and I got to the parking lot, ran through the yard, and I stepped over the barbed wire fence, and I was back into the woods because I tried to cut this creature off to see if that's actually what I had seen, because I couldn't believe it, guys. And I was standing there in the woods, everything was silent, and I was thinking to myself, okay, it's gone. Well, all of a sudden I start hearing this huffing sound, and it was like, honestly, it sounded like a horse. It sounded humongous. You could tell this creature had a big set of lungs, and I couldn't see it because it was too far off into the woods, but I could hear it. And I knew that it wasn't a white-tailed deer because it never ran off and it stood its ground. But yeah, I could tell that it was pissed off that I followed it. So I thought, there's no way I'm gonna take another step into the woods. So I turned back around, went back over the barbed wire fence, walked back to my house, shaking my head in disbelief. And I knew at that moment that I had seen a Sasquatch. So I began watching a bunch of TV shows, trying to figure out what I had seen, and I was having a really hard time wrapping my mind around what I encountered. And I kept going out on the property trying to figure out what was out there. And I guess like I was having a hard time accepting what I had seen. Even though I had seen it vividly, it was right there. I just couldn't believe it. So I kept investigating the property, and there was a lot of strange stuff happening. I found structures they were gifting to me. They would put mushrooms like on logs, on the chair that I would sit on in the middle of the trail. I'd find feathers in the middle of the trail. One time I was looking for mushrooms and I picked a few, and I wasn't sure if they were edible, so I put them in the middle of the driveway, and I went back to my house to look inside this mushroom book so I can identify the mushrooms. Well, when I got back to that spot, the mushrooms were gone, and there was a set of keys sitting there in the middle of the road, and it was a big keychain. Like, there was a lot of keys in there, and it had this rubber tag that said Oklahoma RV, and I didn't really know what to think of it. After I found those keys, I was walking back to my house and I heard this strange vocalization behind me, and it sounded like an elk chuckling. That's the best way I can describe it. But there's no elk in this part of Missouri. I also noticed that my German shepherds would be barking into the woods all the time. It doesn't matter if it was during the daytime or nighttime. They were always barking like there was something out there, and it seemed to intensify at nighttime. Like, you could hear the dogs just barking nonstop at 2 in the morning. There was about 2 or 3 times I'd be in my bedroom and something would slap the side of the house like really hard, and honestly it sounded like a bird crashed into the wall. I'd go out there and there'd be nothing. And this was in the middle of the day, and I have a pretty big yard until you get into the woods, so I found it hard to believe that a Sasquatch would walk out during the daylight in the open and slap the house. But it happened about 2 or 3 times, a big hand slapping the house. That's what it sounded like. One thing that I would usually hear whenever I was exploring the area was rock clacks. I would be walking into the woods and I would hear clack, 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 clack. Or if I'd be hunting the area, I would hear a lot of rock clacks, and it seemed like they were communicating back and forth and warning the rest of the clan that somebody was in their area. But at that time, I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was unusual because I kind of thought it was a woodpecker, but it sounded like rock on rock. Another big thing that they would do out here is push over trees. I would be out here in the woods and hear about 3 or 4 trees go down in the time that I was out there. And that's unusual because if it was just 1 or 2 trees, I would say, okay, trees just fall out in the woods. But this would happen whenever there would be 0 wind outside, and it would all happen like within an hour down here at the creek bottom. So it was always like in the same area. And it seemed like these trees were violently pushed down. So whenever you'd look over, there would be nothing there, absolutely nothing. But at the same time, it was about 50, 60 yards down into the woods, and it's kind of hard to see because if it was them, they could easily push them over and dive down and hide. I heard that they like to spider crawl, so it'd be easy for them to not be seen. Another very common thing that I would hear in this area would be the thumps. I would always hear thumps, especially right before it would get dark. And yeah, it just sounds like somebody picked up a giant log and dropped it down on the ground. But whenever you would look, there'd be nothing there. And it seems like anytime they would do this activity, they would keep like a 70 to 90 yard distance from me, just far enough to where I couldn't see whatever it was. Another strange thing that was common to hear around here were these strange owls. Right when it got dark, around the yard, in 3 different spots, right in the wood line, you would hear these strange owls, and it just sounded very unusual, like hoo, 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 hoo. It sounded like a woman shivering, and it could have been owls, but at the same time, there was a lot of Sasquatch activity around during that time, so I was kind of thinking it was the Sasquatch, but I can't be for sure. Whenever I would be walking around out here, I would also get hit by this smell, just like this terrible rotten sewage smell. And I don't know, a lot of people say that the Sasquatch smell like a dead animal, and it could have been, but honestly, I don't know. One thing that I can say for sure is whenever you have Sasquatch on your property and they're around you, you can sense them. You can sense whenever they're around. You may not be able to put your finger on whatever it is, but you can definitely tell that something's not right, something's following you, and whatever it is, it's intelligent. At that time, I had this little Panasonic camcorder, and I was trying to go out there and film one of these creatures and document the activity, but it seemed like anytime I had my camera, nothing would happen, and whenever I didn't have my camera, things would take place, and it was just really hard to coordinate the timing of the activity. But one day I gotten some bad news. Me and the ex-girlfriend completely split off, and it was probably about 3 weeks after I seen the jet black Sasquatch with the white stripes, and I was just really pissed off. So I decided to take a walk up the driveway and just blow some steam. So I left my cell phone, my camcorder, and took off for a good walk. Whenever I got at the top of the driveway, I was on the other side, and it's kind of like a big circle driveway with forest all around. And I was coming down the hill, and I stepped on a little piece of gravel rock, and it made a loud sound like on the pavement. Well, whenever I looked quartering to my left, I seen this jet black creature on all fours scurrying through the woods. And again, my thoughts were, is that a hog? Is that a black bear? Are those turkey? I couldn't figure it out. And by the time I got a good look at the creature, it was already standing up, and all I saw was this black arm slowly hide behind the tree. And I thought immediately about the time that I was at the Merrimack River, and I had parked my car on top of that cliff the day before bow hunting season, and I seen that black creature on all fours hide behind the tree. It was just like that, except this creature was a little bit smaller. And all I could see was this black fur. It was jet black, and it kind of tapered down like a Christmas tree, but it was like in slow motion. And then whenever it fully hid behind the oak tree, I thought to myself, man, this creature is gone. And for a few seconds, I didn't see it. I had my right hand on my right knee, and I was kind of leaning like this to get a good look through the foliage so I could see whatever it was. And like I said, I was thinking it was gone, and all of a sudden this creature steps out from behind the tree, and he's just propped up like this, scanning the area. And you can tell he thought he heard something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. And I'm sitting there in pure amazement. Like, I can't believe what I'm looking at. I know exactly what it is, and it's just blowing my mind that I'm looking at a little juvenile Sasquatch, and he has no idea that I'm standing right there. This creature was probably about 4.5 feet tall, jet black. I mean jet black, and it kind of had like this shine to it. You could see like this shine on his fur. So this juvenile was jet black. He had a conical shaped head, and he had big round eyes about the diameter of a Coke can, and you could see these black pupils that were about pea size or a little bigger, and its eyes were really white and glossy looking. And the creature looked extremely innocent. It was a handsome little guy, honestly, and it looked like a little gorilla mixed with a person, but its face was covered with jet black fur. You couldn't see like the nose, the mouth, and you could just see these big wide eyes sticking out of all that fur. And like its head was like the diameter, I don't know, it kind of reminded me of like a grizzly bear or a bison, like how thick their neck is. And yeah, this thing didn't have any neck. From what I could tell, it had pretty long arms, but I could only see from like the waist and up, because the rest of it was covered up by the foliage that was growing next to the oak tree. And he was just sitting there observing the area, because you could tell he thought he heard something. Like, he was looking a little bit to his left this way, and I'm over here to his right. And the creature scans from his left to his right, and whenever he sees me, his eyes get really big, and he kind of like puffs up his chest like this, and then shoots down and disappears. I looked to the left and to the right of the oak tree, trying to see where the creature had gone, but he was gone. After that, everything got quiet. I didn't hear anything, and all I saw was like this little sapling swaying back and forth, because I guess he hit it whenever he ducked. But it was amazing how fast that creature was. It was so fast that it was honestly like a blur, like he just disappeared. But I think honestly it was more speed than cloaking, honestly. That's what I believe. But I feel like maybe he spider crawled away, because like I said, he must have kept that tree in between us, because I never saw him run off or anything. He just ducked down and he was gone. Although he had a bunch of fur covering up his face, and it kind of looked like Pac-Man, like one of those creatures that chases around Pac-Man. It gave me that vibe, because it had like the big wide eyes sticking out of the fur, but you could see these canines sticking out from the top down, and they were sharp, but they were dental white, very white. And it seemed like this creature bathed and used conditioner, because its coat was super clean and it looked extremely healthy. After the creature disappeared, I couldn't believe it. My mind was blown. I remember I kept saying, oh my gosh, oh my God, that was so cool. And yeah, I remember also saying, my God, they are real. And I found that to be rather interesting, because I watched an interview with Bob Gimlin, and he said those were his exact words, my God, they are real. And as I was standing there with my mind blown away, I remember getting this dark feeling like, okay, I just seen a juvenile, Sasquatch are real, Mom and Dad have to be close by. So I kind of looked behind me, looked around, I didn't see anything. And I walked back to my house, shaking my head in disbelief, but I knew right there that Sasquatch existed and they were living on my property. Like I had told you guys earlier, my dogs would be barking all the time, especially at nighttime. I had 2 German Shepherds, and it seemed like one of the German Shepherds loved to go to the edge of the yard and bark into the woods, but at nighttime, he would go down into the creek bottom and be barking all night long. Well, one day, Sinister, that dog that was going down to the creek bottom, just disappeared. He was just gone, and I didn't know what happened to him. I was like, what the heck? Well, about a couple weeks later, Macy, the other German Shepherd, she went missing too. And I just thought they ran away because they were my ex's dogs, and she left them with me. And I just felt so guilty because I couldn't even take care of myself, and I failed the dogs because I was the only person that they relied on to take care of them. And it was probably a few weeks later, I was up here in the spot where I heard the whistles and seen the orbs, and I was walking around this old abandoned house, and I found this skull. I was like, whoa, what is this skull from? And once I saw the teeth, I immediately knew that it was my dog Macy, because she had teeth like a crocodile or like a raptor, and they were dental white, and she was still young, so I knew it was her. But at that time, I didn't know it was Bigfoot till later on in my journey. I found out that Sasquatch would take dogs. But yeah, I feel like I failed them, and at the time I just didn't know what it was. I know I had seen Sasquatch, but I didn't know that they were barking at them. And I don't know. I mean, I had the feeling that was what was going on, but I couldn't prove it. So it was probably the next day or so, I had walked back up the driveway to the spot where I encountered the juvenile Sasquatch, and I walked up to the oak tree that the creature hid behind, and I was looking around and I seen this rock sticking out of the ground, and I thought, man, could that be an arrowhead? No, it looks too jagged, and it was halfway covered with like dirt. So I picked it up, cleaned it off, and to my amazement, it was an awesome arrowhead. And the weird part was it kind of resembled like the head shape of the Sasquatch, the little juvenile that I seen. And I thought it was unusual that that arrowhead was right there where the Sasquatch was at, because I had went looking for arrowheads around here and I had never found any. Another thing I want to talk about is the conical shaped head on this Sasquatch. I had never heard a report or anyone ever mention of such a large conical shaped head, but it could have been just because he was a juvenile. But if anyone's ever seen Nefertiti from the side, like how elongated her skull is, this little juvenile's skull was just like that, and it went up probably about, I don't know, probably like 1.5 feet. I know I keep stretching out longer, but I'm trying to get the right size. Probably about 1.5 feet above its forehead, and it went up to a point. But I also remember like how I described the hair on its arm, like how it tapered down. On its head, it tapered up. And at the very top of its conical shaped head, like you could see the hair was messed up at the top, just like a human's, like that bald spot on the back of our head. It was like that. It was kind of messy at the top. But like I said, the fur on this creature was perfect. And the best way I can describe it is like a black bear cub. How nice and clean their coats are. It was very much like that. Or if you've ever seen somebody's house cat, those cats that have like longer hair and they're jet black, it was very similar to that. After I had this encounter with the juvenile, it seemed like the activity intensified, and I was hearing more rock clacks, tree knocks, thumps, trees getting pushed over, weird smells. I was having pretty good success with the gifting. I remember one day, it was in the evening time, right before it got dark. Actually, I did this several times. Right before it got dark, I had these 2 jars of peanut butter, and I put them in the gifting basket, and I walked back home. Right when the sun came up the next morning, I would go out there, and the peanut butter would be gone, and the lids would be sitting there. That happened several different times. Another incident was I was fishing at Merrimack Springs. That's not too far from here. And I'd caught like 3 or 4 fish. I was cleaning them at the cleaning station, and the game warden walked up behind me, and I kind of got nervous. I'm like, hey. She asked me, do you want these fish? I confiscated these fish from somebody who had way too many fish on their stringer. And I said, sure. They were kind of smaller and shriveled up. You can tell that they were in her truck for a while. So in my mind, I was thinking, I'm gonna go back and gift these to the Sasquatch, because I already had my stringer full. I ended up putting 2 fish in the gifting basket, and I kid you guys not, in an hour, I walked outside my house and I was looking in the yard, and at the edge of the woods, I'm like, is that my gifting basket? I walked over there and my gifting basket was at the edge of the yard. There's no fish in the basket, but it seems like they took the fish and brought the basket to me as if to thank me for the gift. All right, this next encounter takes place pretty close to the Merrimack River. A lot of these encounter stories that I'm telling you are either right off the Merrimack River or a couple miles away from the Merrimack. But it was 2019 in the fall. I had spoken with an old coworker, and he was telling me about a good public land area close to him where he had actually seen a Bigfoot, because I had reached out to him and I told him, hey, I had a Bigfoot encounter too, because this guy told me about his Bigfoot encounter probably about 10 years ago, and I didn't really believe him, but at the same time, I didn't dismiss it. I thought maybe he's telling the truth, maybe it's possible, because he's a really serious guy. He has a pretty high up position in the company, and he just doesn't mess around. He's a pretty serious guy. But I drove out to that spot, and I was just tired of being home, laying in bed and walking around the property, because at this point my back was still out and I just needed to get out of the house and do something different. So I went out there to this public land area for the first time, and I walked down the Ozark Trail, found a pretty good food plot nearby, and there was this big oak tree that fell down at the edge of this food plot. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna set up a chair and sit behind this fallen tree to conceal myself, because I just didn't think I had it in me to set up my hang-on stand, like a tree stand up in the tree, because my back was just so damaged. Just sitting down really caused a lot of pain, and I had to take a lot of Motrin, Tylenol, and it sucked. But I got there early that day, probably around 2 p.m. in the day, and it was really windy out. And honestly, like, I usually don't get out to an area that early, but being that this was my first time in the area, I wanted to make sure I got there early just in case I couldn't find the spot. But I ended up setting up my chair, I got my bow ready, and I was sitting there for a few hours, and the wind was really picking up. And I remember across the field in the woods, I was hearing woodpeckers. It seemed like there was 2 woodpeckers going back and forth, knock, 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 knock. And it seemed like a little Morse code going back and forth. So for about a few hours, I was thinking, yeah, those are just woodpeckers. And they kept going off back and forth, back and forth. And by this point, my back was hurting pretty bad, so I had to stand up and stretch. I even laid down on the ground. Yeah, what a hunter, right? Laying down on the ground during a deer hunt. But yeah, my back was hurting that bad that I couldn't sit in the chair anymore. And I got back up into my chair. I was sitting there, and I remember seeing this hawk fly through the woods, and it flew right past me, and it was trying to get a squirrel. So the squirrel jumped up on the tree and started going crazy, and he barely lived there. And yeah, as I was hunting, it was just getting dark, and I remember bending over, getting into my fanny pack, looking up, and there's a doe standing right there. She blows, runs off, and then about 10 or 15 minutes later, it's starting to get pretty dark now, and it's still, the wind's blowing pretty hard. I see these 2 does run behind me, and they seem like they're running away from something. Well, I sit there and wait it out, and I can still hear these 2 woodpeckers across the field going back and forth. Knock, 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 knock. Well, all of a sudden I hear this loud tree knock, and it sounded like whatever wood knocked broke its knocking stick on the tree. Like you heard whack, and you could hear like the tree explode, or the limb that it used. And I thought, whoa, okay, these aren't woodpeckers. There's something over there. And as soon as it did that wood knock, way off to my right, down in the valley, I hear this perfect wood knock. It sounded like somebody used like a baseball bat and hit it up against a tree, or like Mark McGuire was out there and just hit one out of the park. And there's no houses around. And about a few seconds after that, I hear this loud, perfect wood knock on the trail right behind me where I had walked in at. And that really terrified me because at this point it's getting dark. So immediately I was trying to record the sounds with my camcorder, and I shut the camcorder down and pack up my stuff and get ready to leave. And it really terrified me because I had walked through those knocks to get back to my vehicle, and it was spooky. I felt like they were hunting me and they were communicating back and forth. But yeah, I was thinking that was just woodpeckers across the field until I heard that loud knock. And it was probably about 2 months after that, I was telling a friend about the wood knocks and what I experienced. So we went back there and checked out the area, and I was showing this person, you know, this is where I was hearing the knocks. Well, we walk about 20 or 30 yards back into the woods, into a pine thicket, and all of a sudden we can see all kinds of structures. And one strange thing that I noticed was all these pine trees were all leaning the same way. It looked like something blew them over and they're all laying the same way, but there was all these X structures in there, these giant arches, and all kinds of sign. I couldn't believe it. We were both blown away, honestly, because the person I took in there had actually had Bigfoot experiences in the past, as far as like being followed out of the woods and things of that nature. But yeah, I was amazed to find out that where I had heard these wood knocks is where I ended up finding some of the best structures that I had ever seen in my life. And I remember seeing these structures like on Todd Standing when he had Les Stroud on, and many other Bigfoot shows. And as soon as I saw that X, I knew, because I remembered seeing that on TV. And the fact that there were so many X's and arches all in one little spot, like a little 5-acre area way up on the ridge in a pine thicket overlooking the Merrimack River with springs all around, and there's no houses around. So I don't think people could have crushed these trees and made the structures. Like, people definitely did not make them. I know a lot of people refer to people making them or strong storms, but there seemed to be geometry, some type of pattern or language within these structures. So I didn't feel like it was random, because I had always been in the woods my whole life and I'd never seen anything like that. So that same fall, I was down here at the creek bottom bow hunting, and I had set up my XOP hang-on stand in a tree, and I was probably sitting there only for about an hour. It was like 3 p.m. and I like to get in there early, guys. I don't like to miss out on the action. But I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard this whoop sound, but it's unlike any whoop I've ever heard before, because usually it's like whoop, like a loud whoop. But this one, it sounded like a tornado siren. It was so loud and it carried out for so long. It was like, whoop. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it really freaked me out, because it was like a sonic boom. It was that loud. And immediately I got out of my tree stand, started tearing things apart. I was walking one way, another way. Honestly, I was like disoriented. So I was like, okay, I have to figure out what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pack up my stuff and I'm just gonna leave. And that's what I did. It terrified me, because I felt like I cornered this thing in, because there's a state highway back there in town and I'm in the deep part. So he has to walk past towards me to get out of there. And I just don't think he liked that. But yeah, I definitely think it was Sasquatch, because of the vocalization. There's nothing out there that can scream that loud. All right, this next encounter is called the Fox and the Sasquatch, and it was 2019, still in the winter time. And I had noticed that in the wood line, right when it got dark, I could hear creatures walking around out there, and I wasn't sure if it was deer. I knew that the rut was on and the bucks were chasing the does around. So I noticed the first time they came around at nighttime, I heard like crack out in the woods, and you could hear them breaking trees. There would be zero wind out there, and you could hear them walking around, bipedal footsteps in the leaves. So I thought, man, that's got to be Sasquatch. What I found fascinating was whenever I would hear these sticks break at nighttime, I would go out there the next day during the daylight hours, and I would find these strange structures, as far as like these X's and these arches with like a stick holding them up. And these were areas that I was very familiar with, so I knew they weren't there, and I was thinking it possibly could be Sasquatch. So I'm sitting there in my room with the window open, and at that time I was a cigarette smoker, but my main goal was listen for any deer movement because I had been going deer hunting in the morning. So I was thinking if I hear the bucks out there at nighttime, they're going to be around in the morning. So I was sitting there with the window open, listening for any wildlife. And my thinking was, if I hear the bucks out there at night, I'll be able to catch them in the morning time. But all of a sudden, I started hearing what sounded like a chimpanzee being ripped apart. And I pulled out my camcorder and I'm trying to record this, but I can't adjust the settings to where you can see at nighttime. And the whole time this thing's carrying off, and it sounds like something's seriously distressed and in trouble. Well, all of a sudden I see this fox come out of the tall grass, out of the woods, and into the yard, and it goes across the yard back into the woods. And the whole time this vocalization, this distress call is going off. Well, a few seconds later, another fox comes out of the tall grass, and he comes out real slick, low to the ground. And he goes across the yard and goes back into the woods. And I'm thinking, man, that's strange. And like I said, the whole time, this distress call is going off. And a few minutes later, a third fox comes out of the tall grass into the yard and into the wood line. After I seen those three foxes, I can hear what sounded to be a large group of deer coming out of the deep woods to the edge of the wood line. And I can hear like sounded like a bunch of animals. So I grab my spotlight and I shine it into the wood line, and I see these yellow glowing eyes, and it's about 4, 5, 6 different sets of glowing eyes, and they're swaying back and forth. I'm hitting them with the spotlight, but I can't see whatever it is. The only thing I can see is glowing eyes, and they're swaying back and forth, up and down. It's like they're trying to figure out what I am, and I'm trying to figure out what they are. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if those are deer. And I remember thinking this thought in my head. I thought, if those were Sasquatch, the eyes would be way higher off the ground. And I kid you not, as soon as I thought that, one of the sets of eyes goes up like an elevator to about 9-10 feet, and I'm not exaggerating. It went up really high. So I guess the Sasquatch came in on all fours to see what was in trouble, and I guess they were just checking it out. All of a sudden I start hearing bipedal footsteps from the direction where I seen the foxes come out of the wood line, and I hear and it's getting closer, closer and closer, and I'm scanning the woods and I can see all these eyes shining, and it's getting closer and closer. So I shine the spotlight to my right in this gap in the trees, and I can hear it. Well, all of a sudden this white Sasquatch walks through that clearing, and I'm hitting it with the spotlight. And the Sasquatch never looked over at me one time. This creature, it had a round head, almond-shaped black eyes. Its hair was like this whitish gray color. If anyone's ever seen that Bigfoot channel called Arkansas Bigfoot, he talks about Subay the Gray, and he has this photo of a Sasquatch that is identical to what I had seen. And the Sasquatch walked through that clearing and met up with the rest of the clan, and that really freaked me out. I shut the window. I didn't go out that night, and I knew that there were Sasquatch around the property, and that was a chilling feeling knowing that they were out there. I didn't even want to go out there at nighttime. So about 2 weeks after the spotlight incident, it seemed like they returned and they were out there at nighttime again in the wood line. And by this point, I had bought a cheap night vision device off of Amazon, and it looked like a pair of binoculars with like a TV screen, but on the outside it had like these 2 IR lights, and they lit up really bright red. So anyways, I went back in the house, got that, came back out to the yard and walked to the spot where I'd last heard them. And I turned on that device. It was pretty bright because of the screen. And as I aimed it and scanned through the woods, I heard something get up and it walked off. Like you could hear it walking off into the deep woods down to the creek bottom. So I thought, okay, they're out there. And I scan, and then I hear something else get up and it walks off down into the woods. And then I scan around and there's a third one. It sounded like it got up, walked off down to the creek bottom. But my thinking was they were able to see the IR light, and it freaked them out. It seemed like they didn't like it, because it seemed like they were on a pattern. Every 2 weeks they would do that, and after I went out there with the night vision device, they never came up again. So I think it freaked them out. And it was cheap night vision. Like the IR lights were really bright. It looked like 2 red eyes. I'm sure it did to them anyways, but a lot of researchers say that they can see infrared light, and if you have a night vision device, it won't work. You'll have to get like some type of thermal device, which could be true, but I figured researchers would find that information to be valuable. It seems like they didn't like the night vision device, and they didn't return after I tried to record them that night, and I do think they were able to see the infrared, and it freaked them out. All right, so this next experience happened around Merrimack Springs, Missouri, on some public land, and it was pretty close to that encounter that I told you guys about whenever I had went to that public land area, and I was standing over that cliff, walked back to my car and saw something black on all fours get up and hide behind a tree. This next experience is across the river on some public land. I had went out there to bow hunt, and I found a food plot that was about 1.5 miles away from the parking lot. So it was a really long walk, and it took a lot of energy to get there. And I had set up my tree saddle, which is like a certain type of deer stand that's very portable, and I'd set it up in the tree. I was up there most of the evening, and I was looking around my backpack and I realized, oh man, I forgot my headlamp. So once it gets dark, I'm not going to be able to find my stuff and get it into my backpack properly, and I might have to come out here to look for things the next day. And I was thinking, I don't want to have to drive all the way back here and make that walk just to find one item that I may have lost in the dark time. So I started breaking my things down, and whenever I looked up, there was an 8-point buck coming my way, and he's just staring at me. He's got like this confused look. I know he sees me, so I'm like froze to the tree, like, oh man, why did I have to break down right now? So I try to get back into my saddle, clip myself back into the tethered, and the buck runs off, tears off through the woods. So I'm like, oh man, I blew it. So I tear everything down, pack everything up, and start walking out. And by this point, it's pretty dark out. Well, whenever I'm walking on this conservation road going back to the parking lot, I can hear what sounds like a deer walking right next to me, like shh, 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 probably like 30, 40 yards to my right there in the woods. So I would stop, and then it would stop. I would start walking, it would start walking. So I thought, man, this is strange. Like something doesn't feel right. I started walking and this thing was walking with me. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna have to book it. I didn't take off running, but I was walking really fast. And the whole time this thing was following me. Eventually it stopped following me. And at that time I thought it was a deer, but I don't think a deer would be following someone at nighttime like that. They're pretty touchy and they spook really easy. So I do think it was a Sasquatch, and I've heard encounters in that same area, and I'd seen something strange across the river pretty close to that spot, so I'm thinking that's what it was. All right, so this next encounter is pretty difficult to talk about just because it's one of those experiences that you know nobody's gonna believe, but after I had the encounters here, it was probably like a year or two later, I would walk around a lot, just walk all over the place, trying to see if I could kick up a Sasquatch or have that same encounter again. Well, I ended up transitioning from doing a lot of walking to sitting in a chair in the middle of the woods and just listen. While I'd be sitting in that chair, I could hear wood knocks and little sounds like something was watching me. And honestly, it didn't sound like too much. Like I said before, it probably sounded equivalent to like a bird or a squirrel, but I could hear it off about 80 yards into the woods, and I'd be sitting there listening to it day after day. So about, I don't know, a week and a half or 2 weeks of listening to that, I decided, okay, I'm gonna walk around and I'm gonna hike down this trail real quiet and see if there's anything down there. Well, when I get, it's actually this same ridge, when I get down about halfway down this ridge, I heard something grunt, and it was like a big nasty grunt, like. So I looked to my right and I saw this brown creature, and honestly it happened so fast so I can't give you guys like any facial description, but it was brown and I could tell it had a conical shaped head, and it was probably about 5 feet tall. And as soon as I looked over at it, I saw 2 breaths of steam like blow out of its face, because it was around 7 or 8 in the morning time. And as soon as it did that, guys, I kid you not, it looked like it disappeared. It looked like somebody threw up some sand into the air and like the wind blew it off into the distance. But I contemplated whether the creature was so fast that it looked like a blur, or maybe it just disappeared. After the creature disappeared, behind me, I heard rapid, fast wood knocks, like something was setting off the alarm. And that's kind of the impression that I got, because I caught this thing off guard. I'm thinking that the Sasquatch thought I was sitting in that chair and I was able to sneak down the ridge, and they were looking uphill and they realized that I was standing right there. So they freaked out and got out of there. But I think it was juveniles, and a lot of the activity that I experienced, I think, were the juveniles around the area. And I believe, it's my theory, that the Sasquatch were here to raise their juveniles. And I noticed whenever I was having the activity here, the encounters, every day, way off in the distance in the deep woods, I would hear somebody logging, and it was every day for about a year and a half. So I feel like these creatures were pushed onto our land and that's why they were here. So I feel like it's important to mention that in these same areas where I've had a lot of Bigfoot activity, cryptid encounters, I've also seen a lot of strange lights in the sky. And I don't really want to get too deep into that, but I feel like there possibly could be a connection with the UFOs and the cryptids because it's taking place in the same areas. And for example, one night I had walked outside the door, and it seems like as soon as I walk outside, look up, I'll see these strange lights, and I'll have to run back inside the house and grab my camera every time. But anyways, this one night I'd walked out, I'd seen these two orange lights floating through the sky, and it didn't seem like it was a drone, a satellite, or an airplane. There was zero sound, and it seemed a lot lower in the airspace. It didn't seem like it was very high up there, but I had ran back inside to grab my camera. Nothing happened. I was out there for probably about a good 30 minutes, and I kind of gave up. I walked back in, figured everything was gone. A little bit later, I had walked back outside, and I remember I was walking down the sidewalk to my house, and I looked up, and this giant black triangle floats over the house, and it has 3 bright lights on each end. And I remember the back right light was really bright. It was brighter than the other 2 lights, and there was zero sound. It was probably, I would say, like 100 yards across, but it felt like the craft stood still and I was moving backwards, like the earth was actually moving back and that thing was standing still. But that was just the feeling that I got whenever it hovered over me. And I remember there's this large oak tree that's right next to the house, and from end to end this thing was longer than that oak tree. So I don't know, guys, if there's a connection, but this is the same area that I've had a lot of encounters in. If the aliens really are abducting people and they're doing these genetical experiments, what would the byproduct of that be? If they mixed us with them or some type of animal on this planet, I think that could be an answer as to what's going on. And in the ancient Bible, it talks about the Nephilim being here before the flood and even after the flood. And that's kind of what every civilization has talked about, is these mythological creatures, which I believe to be cryptids and extraterrestrial beings, which could be AKA demons. But yeah, it's been talked about for so many years. So I think it very possibly could be these same beings that were here before the flood are here today, and they were able to hide and keep under the radar. Another experience that I had was shortly after I started Sasquatch Theory and I began interviewing people. I had met Mike from Understanding Bigfoot, and he told me he had a buddy down in the Mark Twain National Forest who had a cabin, and he had a few encounters and the Sasquatch were coming up to the property, and he asked me if I wanted to go out there and camp. So I said, yeah, absolutely. And when we went down to that area, we looked around the property. I interviewed the people that were there that day, and we found some strange impressions, like in the grass, down in the creek bottom. My buddy Steve found a pretty good track, or what seemed to be a track. And I remember when we were walking that creek bottom, my buddy Steve was telling me about being zapped, and he was talking about mind speak, I think. And all of a sudden we heard this loud thump, boom. And he said, "Stop, do you hear that?" I said, "Yeah." We just kind of stood there and looked. We didn't see anything. We ended up walking back to the house, and that day, that night, we sat around the campfire talking about Sasquatch, and not too much happened. So I was thinking, I might go home. Like, there's not a whole lot going on. I documented and interviewed everyone that I could and explored as much as I could around the property. And my friend Bill, he only had like 5 or 8 acres, so it wasn't a lot to go through. And the place was surrounded by Mark Twain National Forest, but we just weren't sure about the boundaries, and I was new to that area, so I only looked around his property. But right as we were all standing up around the campfire, I was getting ready to say, well, I think I'm gonna head out for the night, get back home. Right when I was getting ready to leave, we heard a perfect wood knock, and we all jumped back and our eyes were wide open, and we were staring into the woods. And a few seconds later, another wood knock, and then another, and you could hear them breaking limbs, and it sounded like they were dragging limbs across the ground. And at this point, all my camera batteries are about dead. I have a GoPro with like 35% left. I'm trying to figure out how to document these creatures. So I run back into the cabin, I open up my backpack, and I'm digging through the backpack, just pulling things out. I'm trying to find something to record the Sasquatch with, and I find my Zoom H1 audio recorder, and I'm like, this is gonna have to do. So I take that recorder and put it at the edge of the yard and aim it into the wood line. And the whole time they're wood knocking and just walking around, you can hear them. And I try communicating with them. I ask them questions like, can you give me a wood knock? How many of you are out there? And whenever I would ask it to do a wood knock, it would wood knock. And I remember asking the creature, can you push over a tree? And probably about 30 seconds after I asked that question, you hear this large tree come crashing down, crack. And it was pretty freaky. They ended up staying for about an hour, maybe 2 hours, and then they just disappeared and everything got pretty quiet. Later on, in the middle of the night, you could hear vocalizations. The next morning, we heard them hollering in the Mark Twain National Forest back and forth to each other. I remember the next day after reviewing the footage, my camera picked up wood knocks that we didn't hear whenever we were there. And I thought that was pretty unusual because it seemed like there was a paranormal aspect behind that. I had went back to that area trying to document the activity, but it seems like I would have gear failure, things wouldn't record. The Sasquatch would go off when we're not ready, but we were able to document things here and there. All right, this next encounter is a paranormal encounter, and it's about a shadow person. I feel like there could be a connection with the Sasquatch topic just because a lot of people mention the portals, but as far as the shadow people being connected with the Sasquatch, I don't really know. But I'll tell you guys a story nonetheless. My family and I would go down to Jalisco, Mexico for vacation during the winter months. So that day I was at my parents' vacation home in Mexico, and I remember everyone being gone that day, and I was at the house by myself. I remember being really bored, so I decided to walk down into town and just explore the market. They would have like these big markets in town and all these tables set up, and they'd be selling different items. But I remember walking past this table that had all these DVDs for sale, and they were horror films. I remember seeing like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the Saw movies. So I ended up buying the Saw movies, Exorcism of Emily Rose, and I got back home to the house, popped in the DVD, and I started watching The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Well, about halfway through the movie, when the priest was doing the exorcism and Emily was speaking in tongue, she was speaking Latin, I remember being really afraid and feeling like this dark feeling like I shouldn't be watching this. And all of a sudden the power in the house goes out. I'm on the second floor and it's pitch black. So I have to feel my way out of the house. And I remember I'm feeling the walls and I'm just trying to feel my way out. I remember going across the hallway and I could see the stairs barely lit up from a window that was in the house. So I'm walking down these stairs, feeling the wall, and I finally get down to the bottom. Well, whenever I walk out the front door of the house, all of a sudden this black cat runs out in front of me, and it's startled. Like it startled me, but the cat was also startled by something. And I noticed that the cat's hair was like standing up. You could see the cat's fur standing up on end. And whenever he ran by me, he went, "Meow!" Like he was freaked out. And I jumped back and I'm like, oh my gosh. It was just a cat. Thank God I was able to make it out of that house. Thank God that was just a cat. And I looked to my left, probably about 3 to 5 feet in front of me, and there's this black mass in the ground. And this figure comes out of that black mass and it's like crouched down. All I can see is this jet black figure and like this round hole. and this figure stands up like a character out of a superhero movie, real slow. And this being stands up, and at this point, we're face to face. I'm looking at this being that's jet black, and it looked like the Silver Surfer, but just all black, or like some type of mannequin. And I got this chilling feeling. All the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like all the blood went to my face, and fight or flight kicked in, and I took off running. I mean, I hauled butt. All of a sudden, I had little kid legs. I was just gone. And I ran into the street, went across the street, and my dad has another house right there across the street, which my aunt and uncle lived at, and I ran in there, and my parents were sitting there with my aunt and uncle drinking tea, and I was like, somebody's in there, like somebody's at the house. They all get up and like run over there, and we go and check it out. No one's there, and I don't know why I told them someone's at the house, like someone's breaking in. I just wanted them to go check it out because I was so freaked out. I didn't want to go back there by myself, and I was hoping that maybe they would see what we saw. We looked around the property. They were looking to see if anyone had jumped the fence or anything unusual, and they couldn't find anything, but that really freaked me out. And I feel like during the movie, when the priest was doing The Exorcist, somehow that entity that was outside had the ability to drain all the power from the house, because all the power just went out right when the exorcism started. And that was a cold, dark feeling. But I feel like this entity was able to manifest after all the energy was sucked out of the house. And I'm not kidding you guys, it looked like a black hole opened up in the dirt, and this figure stood up out of it. So that could be an explanation to like the UFOs, the Bigfoot cryptids, and I know a lot of people will find that hard to believe, but I feel like that experience with the paranormal could be an answer onto what's going on. All right, so I have one more strange story, and there's probably a lot more. I just can't remember everything. I'll try to write this down, maybe create a book one day. That way I can capture every single detail. But this is another strange story that I feel like might be connected to the cryptid paranormal phenomenon. And I feel like if I don't mention this, I'm leaving out a part of the story. But if I do mention it, it's also going to make the rest not sound too believable, but it really happened, so I'm going to mention it nonetheless. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old. I was at the house by myself, and I remember seeing this black hot rod car that pulled into the parking lot in the driveway, and it looked like a car that Cruella de Vil would drive, like a real fancy old hot rod looking car. Well, these two people got out of the car, and they looked like the Men in Black, like Inspector Gadget, and they both had sunglasses on, a top hat, like a trench coat, and they looked like they worked for the government. But nonetheless, they knocked on the door. I answered the door, and they just stared at me. Like they had this stare. They just looked at me like for the first 10, 15 seconds. It felt like a long time. It's like they were just trying to analyze me. And finally, one of the guys said, "Are your parents home?" And I said, "No." And we just stood there and looked at each other. Well, I like got back and closed the door and just thought that was weird. But yeah, it definitely looked like the Men in Black. And if anyone's ever seen the movie, they both look like the white guy in the movie. It was really freaky just because they would just stare at me. But yeah, I never knew what to make of it. And later on in my life, I started hearing about the Men in Black and people talk about it. And after I had my encounters, I thought about that time and I thought, what if? But I don't know if there's a connection. Maybe they weren't the Men in Black, but it was very unusual, and I never had anyone like that show up again. During the time that I was having Sasquatch activity, I can certainly confirm that there was a lot of Black Hawk helicopters around at the time, and I just didn't think it was strange in the moment. But after hearing a lot of people talk, and they said they would hear these Black Hawks, they would see them in the area where they had an encounter at, I thought it was pretty unusual. And I did notice after the activity kind of stopped and went away after 2019, it lasted for about 2.5 years, but after it kind of tapered off, I noticed there weren't there were no Blackhawks flying in the area. I had this strange encounter one day with a pilot, and this Black Hawk was flying over the property, and it was really low. And whenever it got past the garage at my place, it stopped, and it was hovering probably about, oh, I don't know, not very high off the ground. And the pilot looked over at me, and he was just staring at me. Like, we locked eyes for about a good couple minutes, and I don't know, I just got a bad feeling, so I turned around and walked off and went back to my house. And I don't know why he was looking at me like that, and it was very unusual that he was just hovering there with the Black Hawk staring at me. But I can't say it's connected to the phenomenon. It could just be random. Maybe they had to stop and he was just seeing what was going on. But that helicopter was flying really low over the trees, and that's happened a lot around here. But yeah, that's a bulk of my encounters and experiences, and like I said, I can't remember every single detail. There's probably experiences that I forgot to mention, but I think that best sums up my encounters that I had in my life. And this really happened. All of the stories that I told you are real, and they really took place, and they didn't happen back to back. It's not like everywhere I'm walking I'm seeing a Sasquatch or something paranormal. A lot of this stuff happened throughout my life. Now, the lights in the sky, that stuff does happen a lot. And there are different websites where you can get on and see what planes and satellites are in your area. And when these strange lights hover over the house, there's nothing on the radar. If you live out here in Missouri or anywhere in North America and you think the Sasquatch topic is just a joke and it's not real, think again. They're out here. And if you have kids that go and hunt out there, camp, hike, or whatever it may be, you need to be aware, because these creatures are real. What I seen was real, and I saw it really close up, and I know what I saw.
All right, that was most of my encounters that I've had in my life. I know I left out a lot of experiences, but that was the bulk of everything that has happened. The only encounter I left out was the one time I woke up in the middle of the night and there was what seemed to be a gray alien about 4 feet tall, and it was standing next to my bed. I couldn't move my body or get up, and I was only able to move my eyeballs and my lungs. The fan next to me sounded like it was oscillating in slow motion, and this being just stood there and looked down at me as if it was in deep thought. Finally, I was able to break free, and the being was gone. Time seemed to slow down when the being was present, and like I said, that's all my encounters. The only thing I didn't discuss was my paranormal experiences and just some minor Sasquatch activity and things that I have found around Missouri. But I appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you, everyone, and take care and be safe.